After a few hours, night fell. Minnie-Pin and Vikir were walking through the village. Minnie-Pin was reading the request report of our boy, and according to the request, he had affiliation with the Colosseum Academy, and the reason for the request was that he wanted to hire a guide for the purpose of killing monsters. While Vikir was walking beside him with a serious gaze, Minnie-Pin's attention was fixed on our boy, and he couldn't help but blush and feel somewhat surprised. He couldn't believe that this boy truly belonged to the Baskerville family. Minnie-Pin stood in front of Vikir and bowed his head before him as a sign of respect. For him it was an honor to work with someone like Vikir. Upon seeing his attitude, our boy couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. With a sincere expression, Minnie-Pin admitted that he really wished he could see a member of the Baskerville family at least once. Vikir began to observe him, and with a serious gaze asked him not to make so much noise and to calm down a little. Minnie-Pin apologized, revealing that his dream was to join the Baskerville family. Upon hearing this, Vikir's eyes began to shine with surprise. Thinking calmly and seeing that from this time Minnie-Pin wished to become a servant of the Baskervilles, he realized that then, before he returned in time, Minnie-Pin must have dreamed about it for a long time. Minnie-Pin clenched his fists, and, blushing with excitement, mentioned with a smile that the Baskervilles were a family that subdued monsters on the Western Front, known as the Iron-Blooded Sword family. He knew that if he became a member of the family, they would teach him the invincible fencing of the Baskerville style. With a depressed gaze, Minnie-Pin began to touch his head and in a sincere tone admitted that he wanted to get a house, and also some land. He had thought that was the only way to give his wife a good life, but unfortunately, he had been scammed by brokers and his whole life had gone to waste. Vikir's eyes began to shine with seriousness. He knew that although Minnie-Pin seemed weak, he was a supreme graduate. He was at a level where he could even belong to the highest level mercenary guild. Vikir began to look down at the ground and with a smile revealed that he could make that dream come true, but that was going to depend on what Minnie-Pin did. Upon hearing this, Minnie-Pin's eyes widened in surprise, and then an excited smile appeared on his face. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. With a gaze full of emotion, he promised to work hard. After a few hours, Minnie-Pin was driving a carriage full of goods in the middle of the night. Our boy had a secret mission, so for this reason he attended the academy undercover. It was a secret even within the family, so he received no help from Baskerville. For this reason, he had turned to Minnie-Pin, the most capable guide in this area, to help him pay his tuition. Upon hearing this, Minnie-Pin put his hand over his mouth and his eyes filled with tears and surprise. He couldn't believe that the person he respected most within Baskerville, Vikir, had personally praised him. Vikir was sitting among the merchandise. Our boy clasped his hands and with a serene expression asked Minnie-Pin to call him employer from now on and not by his name. While Minnie-Pin's eyes were shining with determination, he clenched his fist and said he would keep that in mind. Vikir began to observe Minnie-Pin with a curious expression and explained that he was a student at the academy and asked which monsters were not so strange, even if he hunted many of them. With a sincere expression, Minnie-Pin turned his head toward him and with a smile explained that the gnoll was a monster that was not too strong, but still could be worth a lot. Gnoll was a strange creature with the head of a hyena and the body of a dwarf that lived in groups in the highlands on the outskirts of the ecliptic. The individual risk level was only C+, but when they gathered as a colony, it could reach up to maximum A. Minnie-Pin, who was driving the merchandise carriage, explained that since these monsters' individual combat power was weak, even a first-year student from the academy could easily hunt many of them, so Vikir would not be very suspicious. And since it was an ecosystem disruptor designated by the imperial family, there was a reward per head. Their skin, meat and even bones could be sold. Vikir began to observe Minnie-Pin closely and noticed that this guy was really competent. A few hours later, they arrived at the habitat of the gnoll and the merchandise carriage stopped. The area was full of gnolls. Some carried swords as weapons and others were prowling around the area. Vikir and Minnie-Pin hid behind the bushes and their attention was fixed on the monsters. With a serious gaze, Minnie-Pin began to point at the monsters with his finger and revealed that they had the habit of collecting shiny things. So the most common hunting method was to scatter glass balls to attract them and kill them. Vikir, who was sitting next to him, remained silently watching the monsters. While his eyes were shining calmly, he realized that this was a method one should use when encountering a small number of gnolls. Upon hearing this, Minnie-Pin's eyes widened in surprise and he nodded his head, since Vikir's analysis was accurate. While they were talking, a snake that was hidden in the branches of a tree began to look at them with a murderous gaze. Just before the snake could take another breath, someone attacked with a fierce slash, cutting the snake's head in half. Pin's eyes filled with fear and confusion since he didn't know how Vicar had cut the snake without a sword. The snake's head fell to the ground. Vicar began pointing backward with his thumb and with a curious gaze asked if there was oil in the barrels of the carriage. With his face full of sweat, Pin nodded. Blood began to emerge from the corpse of the snake. Vicar's cut had been clean. Our boy felt happy because with the barrels of oil they were going to be able to eliminate the entire colony with minimal battle. Pin's eyes began to shine with surprise. He couldn't believe that Vicar wanted to subdue a colony that even the Imperial Punitive Force had given up on using only barrels of oil. Vicar began to stare at the monsters and his eyes began to shine with excitement and a smile spread across his face. Seeing this, Pin couldn't help but feel somewhat confused since he didn't know what the hell Vicar was thinking. Following Vicar's order, Pin brought some barrels of oil and both approached the entrance of the cave where the gnolls lived. The small monsters did not feel Vicar's presence and entered the cave. Our boy approached the entrance and began to observe them from a corner. Not long after, the monsters turned around and their eyes began to shine with rage. Pin's eyes filled with fear and confusion. He didn't know how Vicar was going to defeat so many gnolls. If he attacked without a plan, the gnolls could invade nearby villages. Our boy stood in front of the entrance and began to ponder. Pin's eyes widened with curiosity. He was sure that Vicar would not overlook something like this. Vicar began to walk toward the cave under the moonlight. Pin wanted to know how our boy was going to subjugate the gnolls. Pin left the barrels of oil in front of the entrance of the cave, and both remained silent. While his eyes were shining with rage, Vicar began to gaze toward the ground, and remembered that there were 3 entrances to the lair of the gnolls in this mountain. This was the entrance to the lair of low-level gnolls. Our boy closed his eyes, crouched down and touched the ground. At that moment, mana began to emerge from his body and travel through the ground. Vicar concentrated even more in the image of flying wine glasses and a banquet came to his mind. The Swordmasters were known as superhumans for a reason. After becoming one, he could feel the aura very clearly. Vicar's mana began to emerge from his hand and travel through the ground. At first nothing happened, but several seconds later, small explosions occurred at the top of the mountain. The ground began to shake, and Pin's eyes filled with fear and confusion. He didn't know what was happening. Not long after, the fierce gnolls, with eyes shining with rage, came out of the cave and began to charge towards them. But just then, Pin threw the barrels. Seeing this, the monsters' jaws dropped in shock. The barrels began to hit the monsters, releasing the oil. Pin began to throw the barrels with all his strength at the monsters. Vicar, who was holding a torch, couldn't help but smile, since no one would have thought that he would end up using the same strategy he had used when living in the forest. His eyes began to shine with excitement and a wicked smile spread across his face, although at that time his plan had not worked. This time it was going to work since he was only facing gnolls and not the madam. The oil began to soak the bodies of the monsters. While they were advancing towards our boy, with a wicked smile, Vicar dropped the torch toward the monsters. Upon coming into contact with fire, the oil ignited. An intense blaze began to scorch the monsters, causing them terrible pain. The reason why fire was dangerous in an enclosed space was because it could spread, and the smoke it generated was poisonous. Since he had blocked off the upper entrances, there was no way for the smoke to escape, which caused it to sweep through the entire pack. The inside of the cave began to burn. Vicar and Pin, who were standing at the entrance, started to watch the fire in silence. Pin's eyes filled with surprise and confusion. Even though they were monsters, Vicar had not blinked when taking so many lives. He realized that he was much more cruel and meticulous than he had imagined. Feeling Pin's gaze, Vicar turned his head and while his eyes were shining with calmness, he remained silent. Pin's eyes began to shine with admiration since according to him, Vicky was very cool. Seeing this, with a confused gaze, our boy started touching his head. After a few hours, smoke began to emerge from the mountain, and upon entering inside with a torch, they saw that the cave was filled with gnoll corpses. Pin began to examine the corpses and with a serious gaze mentioned that as expected, the gnolls inside the cave had died from smoke inhalation. He had been in the hunting world for a long time, and this was something he had learned from Vicar. With a serene expression, Vicar began to walk through the cave, asking Pin to forget about the compliments, since some gnolls might have survived, so they should not let their guard down. Pin put his hand on his chest and couldn't help but feel happy to see that Vicar was worried about him. Vicar's eyes filled with confusion since looking at Pin reminded him of Secretary General Chihuahua. They both began to walk through the cave, which was now full of monster corpses. Pin's attention focused on one of the rocks and his eyes widened in surprise. Without wasting a second, he struck the rock using the sword. Upon seeing this, Victor turned around and with a curious expression asked if there was any problem. Minnie Pin began to strike the rocks with the sword and revealed that he could see man-made traces. Minnie Pin struck hard, breaking the rocks and revealing a secret entrance. Minnie Pin's and Victor's eyes filled with surprise and fear, leaving them in shock. The secret entrance connected to a room which was full of gold coins. Victor began to examine the coins and it didn't take long for him to realize that someone had been using this room as a safe. With a surprised expression, Minnie Pin mentioned that Victor was jumping to conclusions, since the gnolls used to accumulate shiny things, so it could be that they had accumulated this. Victor grabbed a gold coin while he was observing it, threw another in the air and asked Minnie Pin to take a look. Minnie Pin grabbed the coin and felt somewhat confused. Our boy revealed that these gold coins could not be released by the bank because they did not have serial numbers, so there was no way the gnolls could have gotten them. Minnie Pin did not know who would have the courage to keep their money inside the gnolls' lair. Victor dropped the torch on the ground, stood up and made it clear that one thing was certain. That person was using this place as a treasure, and was strong enough to kill all these gnolls and take the gold from them. At that moment, a woman wearing heels approached the cave and stepped hard on the corpse of one of the gnolls. She began licking her hand and with a smile realized that rats had gotten into her coin box. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.